it's a question, I suppose, of what the domestic situation is in Spain at the time. It seems to be clearly there was this election in Andalusia, which was a factor in the behaviour at the summit. A lot of these things about the choreography. So if a narrative can be developed that Spain was able to have its case heard, and that there is some trade-off that will be beneficial to Spain. Spain, of course, doesn't want as much as the Gibraltar economy depends on Spanish workers, those Spanish workers depend on Gibraltar for their work. And of course, there is clearly going to be an economic hit for Spain if it wants to, go back to the situation that it was in, what was it 20 years ago when there were the borders was much stricter and so forth.
The far-right party Vox in Andalusia looks set to form part of the regional government, and it has a very hardline policy on Gibraltar, having said it wants to close the frontier. How realistic is that threat, and how does the dynamic work with the Madrid central government?
Now, the protocol on Gibraltar does provide protection during the transition period. So if Spain, whether it was at the insistence of Andalusia or whatever, under the powers exercised by the Andalusian government, were to restrict free movement of goods, restrictions on services, people, that would be a breach of EU law, which would be enforceable by Gibraltar. It would be enforceable, for example, by a trader. But unless there is a future trade agreement that incorporates Gibraltar, which would provide some protection in terms of the border, in terms of goods and so forth, then that protection would go after the transition period, because the protocol will no longer apply.
So will the UK be able to negotiate and ratify future trade agreements with the EU that includes Gibraltar?
So throughout the period of negotiations, the UK will negotiate on behalf of Gibraltar. At the stage of the conclusion of the agreement, however, and the ratification, then Spain has an ability to exercise its sovereignty, but not over Gibraltar as such, but over the agreement. But all Spain has to say is, our only reason for objection to this agreement is that the UK has negotiated on behalf of Gibraltar. The consequence of that could be that there will be no agreement. So it is a real problem, and I think those who have really, read and thought about the agreement, in the next few days, they need to think carefully about whether to pause or stop the process to work out fully all the implications, because so much energy has been devoted to the internal problems within the UK and the Irish protocol that some of the wider ramifications have not been adequately debated. And once the UK is out, it will be too late to resolve many of these issues.
What happens if the Brexit deal is voted down in Parliament?
Well, the difficulty then is that there will have to be an alternative deal, given that there is a political acceptance that no deal shouldn't happen, but the default position is that no deal will happen so long as the political stalemate continues. So we are in real danger of no deal, and that would have immediate implications for Gibraltar, because there would be no transitional protection.
We've seen a lot of unity in the EU during negotiations. Do you think that will continue once the UK and EU start talks on a future trade agreement?
Well, it's a paradoxical situation. Brexit has been the one thing that has really united the European Union. The EU has played a blinder, really, in terms of the negotiations because of that unity, particularly the way in which it's been conducted by the Commission and the whole process. But it's been quite easy for the EU to be unified, partly because the UK has been so divided. I think that there will be splits over certain issues. And they will probably be particular issues that concern certain member states. Fisheries, those states that are particularly dependent on that. There will be Spain's particular issue with Gibraltar. There may even be an issue with Cyprus and the UK areas there. So there are all sorts of potential, and of course there's always the unexpected. Once the decision is one that the member states can have individual positions on, then you're going to get differences.